Right then, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. You've all seen the report that was put out by the Angling Trust and the video that they circulated across social media over the last few days. I've got Jamie Cook, the Chief Executive of the Angling Trust, with me now. I'm going to put a few points to him so we can get some clarity on exactly where we are with this. Jamie, firstly, thank you very much for giving me and also our viewers a reasonable amount of time now to discuss the issues. Difficult times for angling. I appreciate you're very, very busy. I'm going to come straight in with it. When can we get back to angling?
I think the key point that I'd make, Rob, is that that's not our decision. The decision of when we start again is down to the government. It has to be the government's decision. They've got a series of regulations they've put in place and guidance to support the effort to reduce the transmission of COVID-19 and support our public health services or public services as a whole. And from our position, it's not for us to decide when we lift restrictions. What our role is to show how, when that decision comes to pass, we can do so safely and in a phased manner in line with the guidance the government are giving.
So how are the Angling Trust involved with this? You know, I've seen circulations on social media. Well, the government aren't going to listen to the trust. What's it got to do with the trust? It's going to be Boris. This decides. They've got no authority in this whatsoever. Let's talk about the process, because it isn't just a case of Boris going, all right, let's open the door and go. Potentially he could if he wanted to, because he's the gaffer. But the reality is that there is a hierarchy in place, isn't there? And they take advice from all sorts of people. Just tell us a little bit about this process. And also, please, who else is involved in it, like police and health authorities?
So, Rob, the guidance we've received is, so we're the national governing body working under Sport England for the sport in this country, in England. And as a result, we've been in dialogue with both Sport England and then DCMS. And that's been the case right from the start, right back to the lockdown announcement on the 23rd of March. Now, we've been in various conversations with different areas across that community and supported the effort and the emphasis that they've placed on what the government need to crack this first peak, as they're hoping they've achieved at this point. And we've supported that. We felt we're part of a bigger picture, and actually we have to support the effort to save lives and support our public services. What's continued through that point is that we have considerable engagement through our lobbying routes, through our political contacts, and through the all-party parliamentary group for angling, as well as through the advisors within the individual department. So you've got something like Xtra, for example, you've got DCMS, as we've mentioned, you've got the Cabinet Office, all of whom are now, as we understand it, looking at different options for when we come out of the other side, is what would be appropriate to start lifting restriction on, to have an impact on communities and an impact across the country. And for our view, it's simply been the case that initial point, when the guidance was extremely clear, was we have to support this and we have to get behind this as a sport as a whole. As we move forward, the guidance that we're receiving is now is the time, and last week when we presented was the time, to start to put in place some robust arguments and the case behind why fishing should be at the front of the queue for consideration. As we understand the process moving forward, that dialogue continues. So the ministers and secretaries of state involved in each of those departments are being asked to feed in their guidance to COBRA and to the Prime Minister around what from within their communities should be considered for lifting of restriction. And so we've ensured that across those three different departments, they've all received the paper, they've all received the argument, and we're in dialogue with each of those departments as we move forward to make sure that fishing is at the front of that queue and its argument is heard loud and clear.
What are the key arguments that you put forward? We've seen the plan with the phased return. That's the thing that the anglers have seen recently across social media. That's what they're most interested in. But you know, how do you convince government? For a bloke on the street, I can look at it and go, well, hang on a second. There's people queuing in B&Q. I can go to the supermarket. They can go to work. There's people going on tubes. I can sit out in the middle of the field, significantly safer angling than I can doing one of the things that are already permitted. Firstly, why hasn't it already been permitted? And secondly, surely it's just a shoe-in.
I think when making that argument, Rob, you've actually got to look at, if you're trying to convince someone of a position, you have to understand their position first. what they're trying to achieve. And the underlying position the government's trying to achieve is to avoid a second peak, to avoid the transmission of COVID-19 and support our emergency services and our public services. In doing so, they laid out from the start some very clear guidelines that, by and large, communities have followed. And I think, from my point of view, I thank the angling community for their support in that respect, because the vast majority of us have got behind the sentiment of that argument to support our own communities. I think the question around what you can and can't do in other areas are that we were deemed, there's very clear guidance on the government website that fishing is not deemed as essential. It's not one of the specific reasons that you can leave your house. And as such, that's the reason that we followed the guidance alongside every other national governing body across the country to support the government's efforts. The question mark, and I think the arguments are key here. We understand, I'm a fisherman, same as you, I've fished my entire life. We understand that in many senses, our sport is naturally self-isolating. It's self-distancing or social distancing, because we don't want to sit within 2 meters of anyone. You hit someone with your rod if you turned round and were sitting within 2 meters of anyone. We get out into areas that perhaps we don't see other individuals, and across different aspects of our sport and different disciplines of our sport, we all engage in slightly different ways, but by and large, we can practice social distancing. One of the restrictions and one of the pieces that's probably clouded things over the last week to 10 days is this question around travel, non-essential travel. So the police guidance going out to suggest that you could travel a distance in order to take your exercise, provided the time you're exercising was a lot more significant, leaves that open to interpretation, clearly. And with that change in emphasis and that change on focus, it brings into focus the fact that many of the things and the sentiments that governments are trying to achieve and enforcement services are trying to achieve with what they're putting in place align with fishing and align with the benefits fishing derives. So there's been one particular line that I think has been misunderstood in the proposal that we've put to government, and working with the Canal and Rivers Trust, we've used one of their statistics that talks about over half the population living within 5 miles of one of their waterways. Now, we're not in any way suggesting that you can only travel 5 miles if restrictions on fishing are lifted. We're simply laying out a context of how widely available this sport is, and how, if you look at it in that respect, allowing fishing doesn't need to have a negative impact on distances people will travel. We know, I don't know about you, but the 2 syndicates I'm a member of at the moment, I wouldn't be able to fish, I don't imagine, until guidance is lifted, because they're too far. That doesn't mean that I can't then invest in my local club, for example, and fish in waters that I wouldn't otherwise. But that's, again, our guidance is going to have to mirror that of the government on a wider context, and it's not for us to start laying down travel guidance to government. That is their decision. We've delivered a phased approach. That's not because we felt we should deliver a phased approach. That's because our advisors within government and the people that we have relationships with told us that's the way that governments are looking at this currently. And that seems to ring true with what other sports are doing. So I think in making the argument for fishing to be at the front of the queue, what we're trying to use is the parameters that governments are setting out, the way that they want to consider things, and tailor it to them. Now, what they are clearly going to do, and what I would do if I was in that position, is I'd look at what are the safest things that I can allow to do. Because where do I mitigate my risk? And actually, as I look across the full discipline of our sport, there are certain key pinch points that we're aware of that pose greater risk than others. And that's what we've used our experts in questioning, in isolating, in flagging from their own experience, where those pinch points are, and where we've agreed with them or they've made suggestions, say, look, that is a greater risk than this. That's where we've delivered our phased approach. And that's the barometer we've tried to use to make this a coherent argument. And that's the logic we've tried to employ in doing so.
Saw one comment from a match angler saying, not having keep nets, this is ridiculous. We should be allowed to fish. Having organised matches is much better than just allowing people to go fishing, because you know what, it can be policed more.
Your viewers won't know who I am, which is absolutely fine. It's the right way, but I've never been involved in fishing politics. or fishing governance. My background's in business, but I've always fished. My whole life I fished. It's my passion. It's what I absolutely love more than anything. The suggestion that I see that the Angling Trust are against anglers and want people to not fish is ludicrous. We organise more competitions and matches, for example, than anyone else in the UK, as far as I can work out. So actually, the people who it has the greatest detriment on, aside from the individual anglers, are us as an organisation. The easiest thing for us to do would be to say, for that competition example, go out and fish all the Angling Trust competitions. Please do, because we benefit from it. And actually, what we've made a decision based on is, you're absolutely right. When you look at that paper and you look at some of the names that have offered insight, Rob, you yourself have given us guidance in areas that you're aware of. Someone like Dean Macy inputting, Ali Hamidi's been absolutely fantastic in offering support. The paper's gone in front of the team at Drennan who have considered it, and I think credibility-wise, Peter's probably has got that grasp across different disciplines and understanding. And then you've got those individuals that from specific disciplines, someone like Charles Jardine from the game world, Dave Lewis from sea fishing. You look at Keith Arthur, Dave Harrell, who have been long-term supporters of the Trust, like yourself. And then you look at someone like Steve Ringer and Dean Barlow, who their technical knowledge that's what we're feeding upon here. We're not trying to make a decision that isn't thought out and considered. And where I'd hold my hands up, Rob, is with the best will in the world, as you said, with the legal development and the government developing policy. These are our considerations, our plans, based on consultation with the individuals that we have the ability to consult with. When these considerations go out to the wider community, there are clearly going to be areas that people will pick up and question marks people will pick up. And a couple of them been the keep nets question, the travel question. And I think it's down to us to address those and ensure that they're absolutely clear, because in doing what we have here, it gives us that barometer to understand where our community are coming from and areas that we need to make sure our argument is as solid as possible. And actually, when you go in to have these discussions with government and with special advisors to ministers, they're going to be looking at the detail with us, and we're talking through detail. If they say, well, actually, I don't think that's necessary, or I think that's more than you need to do, then we can act accordingly. But I'd much rather go in belt and braces, having something that's robust, based on evidence from across Europe, from other jurisdictions that have delivered it, and based on some solid support from individuals that I respect across our community. We're a broad church, as we know, so there are various different disciplines of fishing, and some of them you can do a lot closer together than others. And from our position, we took it as a credible point where we felt that actually if you were sat there fishing and you had that distance between you and someone else, and bear in mind, you're not just there for those 5 minutes, 10 minutes that you're dashing around a shop to get milk and eggs and whatever else. You could be there for a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 hours to do so. And it was felt that that was a safe and credible position to take. And I think the competition side is one that's actually driven. I know some of the feedback has been that we haven't thought about competition anglers. We've actually probably thought about them more than anyone else. And when you look at some of the input that we've had from Steve Ringer, Dean Barlow, Dave Harrell, in terms of the suggestions they've made to the paper, the specifics they've put in place. I mean, those guys have forgotten more about competition fishing than I will ever know. And when they speak, and they speak from a unified position of all saying the same thing individually and giving the same suggestion, I'd be absolutely stupid not to listen to it. So from our position, some of that development has really come from, and that doesn't just apply to the competition side, it's come from the experts we've consulted and those individuals who are leading in their field. We've got to look at the impact on individuals, and that factor and that well-documented position that we are facing a national mental health crisis. There are many, many, many different means by which people benefit their own mental health, but fishing has a significant part to play in that argument. And it's something that we've been clear on, and for your viewers who have read the full paper that's gone to government, it's the title line. It's something that we can offer that in many other ways, through the restrictions that are in place, through the need for social distancing, self-isolation, that fishing can provide that solitude, that solace, that headspace, that opportunity, and however people derive that benefit, we all know we derive that benefit and that need. And so we completely understand it as anglers, and I understand it as an angler because I benefit from it personally. I have done throughout my life. And some of those stories that you reference, I'm seeing exactly the same thing, and I can relate to them. I could lay out my own stories of how fishing has helped me through tough times through my life. But what we have to do is articulate that position coherently to show the impact it can have to help the government in their objectives. Because ultimately, we are a community, as we might be a sizable participation sport, but in the grand scheme of things and the bigger effort that we're looking at here for the government, we are one area of community. And I think that we've got a significant part to play in feeding into one of the direct outcomes they need to influence and they have a desire to influence. And that's the argument that we're continuing to make, alongside some of the more technical, specific arguments on why fishing should be at the front of the queue as they are considering lifting restrictions in certain areas. I think what we're pointing out is that through the statistics across Europe, there's no positive correlation in the fact that allowing fishing has spiked transmission rates. And it tends to suggest that the nature of fishing and the way that fishing has been implemented, particularly across Europe, when you look at countries like Germany, Holland, Czech Republic, Norway, for example, who they've all got very credible, very robust plans in combating the transmission of COVID-19. The way that they have allowed participation in fishing and the guidance they've put in place clearly hasn't spiked infection rates to a point where you can look at it and say they've got huge infection rates due to the fact that certain participation in certain activities has been allowed. There are some more technical things that have come out of it, and they've informed the process we've gone through as well. So we've lent on the best practice guidelines from across Europe and across countries that have allowed participation through their lockdown periods. And we've also looked at certain areas of science, Rob, and scientific papers, and there are particular ones that we've seen around aerodynamics and the transmission, and looking at individual sports and the means by which, when you look at things like droplets, that 1.5 meters is deemed as that safe distance, that if you are infected, that's your infection radius, if you like. But one of these papers in particular argues that where you're moving quickly, when you're in a high velocity sport, that transmission area is spread simply because of the velocity you're traveling with. So actually for fishing, where in our disciplines we're either walking slowly along a riverbank, wading, or sitting in a single position, we drastically reduce the risk of that transmission in that respect. So I think areas like that have influenced our policy making, alongside some of the more, I guess, the more detailed suggestions in terms of distancing, to ensure that, yes, whilst there is the position that you can queue up 2 meters behind someone in a supermarket, I don't know about you, but I've been doing shopping for neighbours and relatives, and I don't feel comfortable at any point I go to a shop. I don't want to be there. I certainly wouldn't want to be there for any longer than I have to be. And so for me, the argument I can be 2 meters away from the person in front of me or behind me is largely irrelevant, because I don't want to be. I wouldn't want to sit there for 5 hours or 7 hours doing that. Whereas if I was sitting a more secure distance apart from the next person, in terms of my anxiety levels, my well-being, I'd be a lot more comfortable in that activity. And I actually think, just from a responsible perspective, we've gone this far supporting this guidance, looking at something sensible like that. I mean, Rob, you and I both enjoyed various different aspects of fishing, but in the best will in the world, at this current time, if you and I were coming from different households and we're at the same fishery, I think us being 15 metres apart, being able to have a conversation across that distance and share our experience, but being able to keep our own distance to support our own families and friends, I think that's quite sensible from a personal point of view. In the document that's gone to government, trade are clearly covered and specified as there's a need under phase 1 restrictions being lifted for the trade to be able to react to that and to have the earliest guidance possible so they can gear up to do so. Clearly following social distancing guidance, as we've seen with many retailers, and ensuring that wherever possible they can use electronic services for payments, where there are things like click and collect. But if we move forward, as we hope we will, we'll offer some guidance and support to the trade. And we're working very closely with the ATA at the moment and some major manufacturers in doing so. Where I'll hold my hands up is the summary document that we've delivered that I guess is more addressed to anglers. We haven't made that specific enough in that document. So from our perspective, the trade are absolutely integral to supporting the infrastructure that we need to get us back on the bank. And as this moves forward, and as I hope this progresses as we hope it will, the trade have a vital part to play in that respect. So I appreciate you flagging it, because it's probably not something that's explicit enough, having looked back in the summary document, but is clearly covered in the document to government.
The other thing, very briefly, there have been some fisheries that have been opened. Some have closed down. We've seen people have been prosecuted for travelling. What message can we close on for the time being? What have you got to say that either fisheries that want to open, or alternatively anglers that want to go? What sort of message can you just give to them?
I think for fisheries, what I'd say is that I'm acutely aware, having worked with the team. I mean, we set up a dedicated COVID-19 hub within 14 hours of the lockdown restriction being announced. We've had teams looking for every angle of funding available and signposting that funding. And we've got some absolutely brilliant results through the Sport England Community Fund, that angling clubs have been able to access that funding. And the average payment that those that have been successful have received is just over £4,300 per application. So we've been able to signpost to that. We've been able to signpost to those bigger organisations who have rateable values and are able to access government grants. Fisheries are the area that we've isolated that are slipping between the cracks. And again, I'm working closely with Andrew at the ATA and his fisheries members on what campaigns we can get behind and support. We can signpost to things like the FSB, but we really want to try and support fisheries in a more tangible way. And that's been a big challenge for us, is finding a means to be able to do so with direct financial support to commercial fisheries. My message would be simply that I understand from a personal perspective, running businesses, that this is your livelihood, this is your bread and butter, and this is your passion. And I think my point would be is that this is a bigger picture and we are moving in the right direction here. The sentiment coming out of government is correct, and I will honestly work as hard as I can to get us back on the bank safely at the point that the government deem it appropriate to do so, and to start getting people back through the doors or through the gates of fisheries in a safe manner, so that those fisheries can start to function again and start to generate the revenue they need in order to survive. The message for individuals would be a thank you, as it is for fisheries, for supporting us through a period that is actually, we know, is to your own detriment in what you individually want to do. I think the response in general from the angling community has been utterly superb. I think they've understood the fact that we're part of a bigger picture, and I think they've bought into the concept that we have to support our public services, our NHS, and the sentiment of what the government's trying to achieve. As we move forward, I hope that you'll continue to support us and understand that we have the same interest as you. We want to get you out on the bank safely again, but we equally want to play our part in this fight against coronavirus, because it's indiscriminate. It can impact anyone. And what we don't want it doing is spreading further than it needs to by us taking irresponsible actions. I think we've got a great argument. I think we've got a sport that in many ways is absolutely ideal for delivery at the next stage, and should take its place at the front of the queue. And I'll be working tirelessly with my team to ensure that that's the case, Rob.
Brilliant. Well, look, Jamie, thank you ever so much for taking so much time to talk to us. And thank you ever so much for all of the hard work that you have done so far. Brilliant. We shall pass this on to our viewers. Of course, they can find out more information from the Angling Trust website, Facebook page, and also via your Angling Support Hub too. Jamie Cook, CE of the Angling Trust, thank you ever so much. Goodbye.
Thanks, Rob.